Most executive searches fail before they begin. In the first message, the one that never got a response, the one that got a polite no, the one that felt like exactly what it was, a company that needed something from someone who had not agreed to give it yet. That first contact is not a formality. It's the whole game, and almost nobody plays it correctly. Here's what most outreach looks like. Someone identifies a strong candidate, sends a message that says, I have an exciting opportunity I would love to tell you about. Or, your background is exactly what we're looking for. Or the worst version, are you open to new opportunities? The candidate reads it in 20 seconds, decides it is not worth their time, and goes back to whatever they were doing. The message created no curiosity. It created no pull. It announced that the sender needed something from the recipient. And that signal, need, is the single most effective way to make a great executive stop reading. Here's the fundamental problem. Most first outreach is optimized for what the sender wants, not what the recipient finds interesting. It leads with the role before establishing why the conversation might matter. It presents information before earning the right to the person's attention. And it asks for a response before creating any reason to give one. The companies that do this are playing defense. They're putting a message out and hoping someone valuable happens to respond. That is not recruiting. That is waiting with extra steps. The executives worth reaching are not looking. They're not available. They're already building something, leading something, solving something that has their full attention at a company that values them. When they get a generic outreach message, and they get dozens of them every month, they're not asking, isn't this a great opportunity? They're asking, did this person do any real work before sending this? And the answer almost every time is no, which is why the message goes unanswered. There are 3 levels of recruiting, and most companies never get past the first. Level 1 is posting a job and waiting for applications. High volume, low quality, and optimized for whoever is available and convenient. It is picking fruit off the ground, easy, fast, but you're not getting what you actually need. Level 2 is referrals and networking, asking around, does anyone know someone? You get people who are accessible, people who happen to be in between things. Better than level 1, but still reactive, still playing defense. Level 3 is different. Level 3 is precision extraction. You identify the best 40 or 50 people on the planet for this specific role. Not who's looking, not who's available, the best people whose trajectory, judgment, and values match exactly what this company needs at this stage. And then you go get them, one by one, with a first message so specific and so genuinely interesting that they cannot help but respond. The first conversation has one job: not to explain the role, not to sell the company, not to assess fit. Its only job is to create enough genuine curiosity that the candidate wants to know more. That's it. Curiosity, not information. Interest, not commitment. A reason to continue, not a reason to decide. Everything else, the scope, the mission, the opportunity, comes later. But only if you get past the first conversation. And getting past that first conversation requires treating it as a courtship, not a transaction. Let me tell you what happened during a search I ran for a Series B fintech company. They needed a VP of product, someone who had built consumer financial products at scale, who understood regulation without being paralyzed by it, and who could think from first principles rather than playbooks. The candidate pool was narrow. maybe 20 people in the country who fit the profile precisely. We identified the top 5. The founder reached out to 3 of them directly before engaging me. Standard messages, excited opportunity, impressive background. Would love to connect. 0 responses, not 1. I reached out to the same 3 candidates with a completely different approach. All 3 responded within 48 hours. 2 eventually interviewed. 1 accepted the role. The messages I sent were not longer. They were not more detailed. They were not more flattering. They were fundamentally different in what they were trying to accomplish. Here's the framework that makes the difference. A first message to an A player should do 3 things and only 3 things. First, demonstrate that you did real work to understand who they are. Not a generic compliment. Specific observation. Something that could only be written for this person, not copy and pasted to a list. A players receive generic outreach constantly. The moment they sense specificity, real specificity, the kind that required actual attention, they slow down. That pause is everything. Second, make an observation about their work or trajectory that they find genuinely interesting, not flattering, interesting. There's a critical difference. Flattery signals that you want something from them. A genuine observation about a decision they made, a pattern in their career, a specific contribution they're known for, that signals that you paid attention. And people who feel genuinely seen respond differently than people who feel genuinely complimented. Third, open a door rather than presenting a room. Most outreach presents a room. Here is the opportunity, here is the role, here is why you should care. That requires a decision before they have any information. And A players who are not looking will not walk through a door that requires a commitment to what is on the other side. Instead, say something that suggests there's a conversation worth having without requiring them to decide what that conversation is about. One sentence that makes them think that is worth 5 minutes. That is the whole goal of the first message. Not a yes, not an interview scheduled, 5 minutes of genuine engagement. The message I sent to the VP of product candidate referenced a specific product decision she had made at her previous company. One that was publicly documented and that I had a substantive observation about. It asked a single question about how she had thought through the regulatory trade-off involved. It said nothing about an opportunity, nothing about a role, nothing about a fit. It was a genuinely interesting question from someone who had clearly done real work. She responded because she was interested in the conversation. The conversation came first. The opportunity came later. The offer came later still. In that sequence. Here's the part that makes this hard to scale and easy to get wrong. You cannot automate it. You cannot batch it. You cannot have someone else write it and put your name on it. The candidates worth reaching will detect inauthenticity immediately, not because they are suspicious, because they are perceptive. That is what makes them worth reaching. And perceptive people know within 2 sentences whether they're being processed or seen. Which means before you write a single word, you have to do the actual work. What has this person built? What decisions did they make that required real judgment? What can you observe about the arc of their career that reveals something about how they think under pressure? Where did they take a risk that paid off? Where did they take a risk that did not? That work, the work of genuine attention, is what the first message must reflect. Not your opportunity, their story. What happens when you get the first conversation right? The candidate arrives curious instead of guarded. They're not already composing reasons why this does not make sense. They're genuinely open to hearing something that might interest them. Which means that the second conversation, the one where you actually discuss the role, starts from a completely different position. You're not selling. You're having a real exchange between 2 people who have already established there is something worth exploring. That is the difference between a process that feels like a pitch and a process that feels like a conversation. And A players, without exception, will stay in conversations and leave pitches. One more thing that most people miss about the first conversation. The goal is not to get a yes. The goal is to not get a no. Those are not the same thing. Optimizing for yes creates pressure. Pressure creates resistance. Resistance closes the door before the person has enough information to make a real assessment. Optimizing for not no means removing every reason they might have to disengage too early. Keep the message short enough that reading it does not require a time commitment. Make the question easy enough to answer that responding feels natural, not effortful. Leave enough space that they can engage on their own terms. The candidates you want are the ones who have leverage. They will only engage on terms that respect their time, their intelligence, and their current commitments. Your first message is a signal about how you operate. Generic message, you process candidates. Specific, attentive, genuinely interesting message, you think differently. That signal is the foundation of everything that follows. The trust that allows them to hear you. The curiosity that keeps them in the conversation. The openness that eventually becomes a yes. So here's the question to take into your next search. Before you write to anyone, before you reach out to a single person, ask yourself, have I done enough work to write a message that could only be written for this person? If the answer is no, do more work, because the first conversation is not an introduction. It is the moment you signal whether you are worth their time. And the only way to pass that test is to demonstrate in the first message before anything else that you already understand something about them that most people have not taken the time to see. That is what opens everything. Not the title, not the compensation, not the exciting opportunity, the quality of your attention.